He stayed quiet for years, but now Joni Lamb's own nephew has broken the silence. What he's revealing isn't just personal, it's explosive. With one bold move, he's pulling back the curtain on secrets that many thought would never see the light of day. From behind closed doors to public shock, this is the truth no one was ready for. What did he expose? Why now? And how will it change everything for the Lamb family and Daystar? You're about to find out. It all started with grief. Real, raw, and overwhelming grief. When Marcus Lamb passed away in 2021, it shook the entire Daystar family. But for Joni Lamb, his wife and ministry partner for decades, it was personal on every level. She didn't just lose a husband. She lost her best friend, her co-leader, her constant. For a while, everyone expected that Joni would take time to rest, to mourn, to process the weight of it all. And at first, it seemed like she would. But not long after the funeral, something started to shift. Quietly, then more noticeably. It began with whispers. Joni had been seen spending time with Dr. Doug Weiss, a family friend and marriage counselor. Then, those whispers turned into conversations. And finally, news broke. Joni was in a relationship. Not just casually dating, but serious, fast. It caught everyone off guard. But no one more than Rebecca Lamb. Rebecca had always been close with her parents. She admired her father deeply and looked up to her mother as a woman of faith, strength, and integrity. The Lamb family wasn't just a family. It was a legacy, a public ministry, a symbol of Christian values for people across the world. And Rebecca had always believed that legacy mattered. So when her mother jumped into a new relationship just months after Marcus's death, Rebecca didn't know what to think. It didn't feel right. It didn't feel like Joni. And most of all, it didn't feel like the kind of decision that honored the grief they were all still carrying. She tried to be gentle at first. She approached her mom with compassion, hoping to talk it through. But the conversation didn't go how she imagined. Joni was defensive, almost like she had built a wall around herself. She didn't want to hear concern. She didn't want to talk about how fast things were moving. To her, it seemed like she was just trying to move forward. But to Rebecca, it felt like her mom was skipping over the healing process entirely. To her, it seemed like her mom was skipping over the healing process entirely. It felt rushed. It felt like denial wrapped in romance. And Rebecca couldn't shake the uneasiness growing inside her. This wasn't just about her mother's love life. It was about what this meant for the entire family and the ministry they'd all built together. How would people react? What would the Christian community think? What would it say about their values if Joni seemed to move on so quickly? Marcus had only been gone a short time. Was anyone thinking about how this looked, how it felt? The more Rebecca spoke up, the more she felt pushed aside. Joni, once open and maternal, now seemed closed off and cold. And with every attempt Rebecca made to connect, the space between them grew wider. It didn't help that others around Joni, especially those close to Doug, were encouraging the relationship. They made it sound like God had ordained this new chapter. But to Rebecca, it felt like everyone was rushing past the reality of the loss they had barely even acknowledged. In her heart, Rebecca wasn't trying to stop her mother from being happy. She just wanted space. For all of them, to breathe, to reflect, to honor Marcus, and to consider what their next steps meant in the bigger picture. But that perspective was met with resistance. Joni didn't want to slow down. She didn't want to explain herself. She didn't want her daughter questioning her. And the heartbreak of that hit Rebecca harder than she expected. This wasn't just about Joni moving on too fast. It was about the breakdown of something sacred. The trust between mother and daughter. The unity of a family rooted in faith, and the spiritual legacy that Marcus had left behind. That legacy, to Rebecca, was everything. It was their foundation. And now it felt like no one was protecting it. So, as Joni pushed forward with her plans and her new relationship, Rebecca found herself standing at a painful crossroads, trying to honor her father's memory, protect the ministry's values, and still love a mother who suddenly felt like a stranger. It was the breaking point. The moment when grief, family, and legacy all collided, and nothing would be the same again. It was the same night when hope precedes fervent hope. And it didn't happen all at once. That's the strange thing about family fractures. They start small. A look. A silence. A missed conversation that should have happened, but didn't. And for Rebecca Lamb, it all began as a quiet concern she kept tucked away in her heart. But over time, what started privately turned into something much bigger, something no one in the Lamb family could keep hidden anymore. In the months after Marcus Lamb passed away, everyone tried to adjust. Joni was doing interviews again. The Daystar team kept the network running. Publicly, the family was grieving with strength and grace. But behind the scenes, everything felt off. Rebecca could feel it, and she couldn't ignore it. The moment that changed everything was when Joni started dating Doug Weiss. At first it was subtle, friendly texts, occasional meetings, but then it turned serious, and very fast. Rebecca didn't know how to process it. Her father hadn't even been gone a year, and yet here was her mother planning a future with someone new. It was confusing, painful, and honestly, it felt disrespectful, not just to Marcus, but to the entire family, and to the values they had always tried to uphold. She tried to keep her concerns private. She talked to close family. She prayed. She journaled. She even asked herself, am I being too sensitive, too protective? But every time she saw another post, another appearance, another announcement from Joni and Doug, something inside her ached. It wasn't jealousy. It was grief. It was frustration. And more than anything, it was fear. Fear that their family was losing its way, its unity, its center. Rebecca wasn't trying to stir up drama. She didn't want to shame her mother or bring attention to their private pain. But the more Joni pushed forward with the relationship, the more Rebecca felt like she was being forced to either stay silent or speak the truth. And staying silent was becoming harder by the day. Things got worse when Rebecca tried talking to Joni again. The conversation didn't go well. Joni wasn't open to hearing Rebecca's thoughts. She took it as criticism, not concern. She shut it down with comments like, "You don't understand," or "This is what God is leading me to do." And Rebecca, already heartbroken, felt her mother slipping further away. What hurt the most wasn't just Joni's quick decision to move on. It was her refusal to even acknowledge the emotional weight of what she was doing. The family had barely processed Marcus's death, and yet Joni was already talking about remarriage. No pause, no reflection, just forward movement. And it wasn't just personal anymore, it was public. Viewers noticed. Supporters began asking questions. The Christian community, once proud of Daystar's unity, now started to whisper. Rebecca saw it coming. She knew the moment the news broke, people would question Joni's choices, and they did. Social media lit up. Comment sections were flooded. People asked why she was moving on so fast. Why Doug? Why now? Some were kind, some were not. But all of it added pressure to an already fragile situation. Rebecca stayed quiet, publicly at first. But within the family, she tried again and again to raise her concerns. She felt responsible, not just as a daughter, but as someone deeply tied to the ministry. She had grown up in it. She had watched her parents build it from the ground up, and now, it felt like it was unraveling. All because no one wanted to pause and ask, "Are we okay?" The more Rebecca pushed for accountability, the more isolated she felt. Her role in the family started to shrink. She was left out of meetings. Decisions were made without her. It wasn't just emotional anymore, it was structural. The family business no longer felt like a team. It felt like a throne, and Joni, in Rebecca's eyes, had become untouchable. Jonathan, Rebecca's older brother, was feeling the same. He had long been seen as the natural heir to Daystar's leadership. But as Joni's relationship with Doug deepened, Jonathan's voice seemed to matter less. Slowly, quietly, both he and Rebecca were being pushed to the edges of a story they had helped write. At some point, Rebecca stopped trying to pretend. She began opening up to friends. Quietly, carefully, she shared her side. Not to destroy her mother's reputation, but to finally speak the truth of what was happening behind the scenes. And once that door was opened, there was no closing it. The private concerns she had carried for so long were now becoming public. The fracture wasn't just between mother and daughter anymore. It was within the ministry itself. Longtime staff began to notice the shift. Supporters wrote in, expressing their confusion, and the more Joni and Doug appeared together as the new face of the ministry, the more Rebecca and Jonathan's absence became obvious. People began to ask, "Where are the Lamb kids? Why aren't they speaking? What happened to the family we used to know?" Rebecca didn't have all the answers, but she knew something had been broken, and no one was willing to admit it. The final straw came when Joni asked Rebecca to publicly support her upcoming wedding. A simple post, a few kind words, but Rebecca couldn't do it. Not because she hated her mother, not because she was bitter, but because deep down, she didn't believe this was what God had for them. She didn't feel peace about it, and she didn't want to lie just to keep up appearances. So she said no. That decision cost her more than she expected. The silence that followed was deafening. Joni stopped calling. Messages from other family members became rare. Rebecca had become the one who didn't support the new season. And in a ministry world where unity is everything, she quickly learned what it meant to be left out. But even in the pain, Rebecca stood by her decision. She didn't want to hurt her mother. She didn't want to divide the family. She just wanted someone to acknowledge the weight of what was happening, to see that not everyone felt peace about moving forward so quickly. And she wanted people to know that just because something is being done in the name of faith doesn't always mean it's right. The fracture is still there. Maybe it always will be. But for Rebecca, the shift from private concern to public fracture was never about revenge. It was about truth, about love, about legacy, and the hope that one day healing might still be possible, even in the places that feel the most broken. It had been building for months. Every missed conversation, every awkward silence, every time Rebecca tried to reach her mother and got nothing but a cold response or a deflection. And finally, it all came to a head in one painful, unforgettable moment. The confrontation that changed everything. It happened in May 2023, just weeks before Joni Lamb was set to marry Dr. Doug Weiss. By that point, Rebecca's frustration had turned into something heavier. Not just sadness or concern, but something like grief layered on top of grief. She had already lost her father Marcus just 2 years earlier. That pain hadn't faded. It had only been pushed aside by confusion, anger, and a deep sense that her family was slipping through her fingers. Rebecca had tried everything. Calm talks, private messages, long letters. She had prayed. She had waited. She had even considered staying silent for the sake of peace. But nothing changed. Joni was moving forward with her relationship, with her wedding plans, with her public appearances next to Doug Weiss, like everything was fine. But inside the family, nothing was fine, and Rebecca couldn't pretend anymore. That day, it wasn't supposed to be a dramatic scene. Rebecca hadn't planned it. She didn't walk into the house thinking, "Today's the day I'm confronting my mom." But when she saw Joni in the hallway, smiling like she didn't have a care in the world, something inside her snapped. The pressure had built up for too long. The words that had been sitting in her throat finally demanded to be spoken. "Mom, we need to talk." Joni looked up, surprised, but her expression hardened almost instantly. She knew what was coming. Rebecca took a breath and tried to keep her voice calm. "I've been quiet for months. I've tried to understand. But this wedding, this rush into a new relationship, it doesn't feel right. Not for the family, not for the ministry, not even for you." Joni crossed her arms. "Rebecca, we've already talked about this." "No," Rebecca said, her voice rising despite herself. "We haven't talked. You've dismissed me. Every time I tried to bring it up, you acted like I was just being dramatic or emotional. But this is real, Mom. This is our family. This is Dad's legacy." The words hit the air like lightning, and for a moment, neither of them spoke. Rebecca stepped closer, her voice trembling now. "I'm not trying to ruin your life. I want you to be happy, I really do. But how can you be so sure this is what God wants when you haven't even taken the time to breathe, to heal? You've barely had space to grieve Dad, and now you're rushing into this? What are we even doing?" Joni's jaw was tight. Her eyes narrowed. "I have grieved. You don't know what it's been like for me. You think I just moved on? I've spent the last 2 years trying to survive, and now that I've found someone who understands me, someone who's walking the same road, I'm finally moving forward." "Moving forward?" Rebecca asked, disbelief thick in her voice. "At what cost? The family's falling apart. Jonathan feels pushed out. I feel like I've lost my mother. You've cut us off, all because we're not clapping for your new relationship?" Joni's voice was sharp. "That's not true." "It is true, Mom," Rebecca shot back. "You've changed, and not in a good way. You used to listen. You used to lead with grace. But now everything is about you and Doug. It's like the rest of us don't matter anymore." Silence. Rebecca could feel the weight of her words hanging between them, and she hated that it had come to this. But someone had to say it. Someone had to speak the truth. Joni looked away for a moment. Then she said coldly, "You're just angry because you don't get to control this. I'm allowed to be happy, Rebecca. I'm I'm allowed to move on. I never said you weren't, Rebecca replied, tears in her eyes. But moving on doesn't mean burning everything behind you. And that's when Joni said the words that would break Rebecca's heart completely. I don't need your approval. I don't need you telling me how to live my life. Rebecca stood there frozen. Her mother's voice, usually so full of wisdom and love, sounded distant, foreign, like a stranger's voice. For the first time, she realized how deep the divide had become. This wasn't just a disagreement. This was a fracture. A mother and daughter, once so close, now couldn't even hear each other through the noise of disappointment, hurt, and pride. Rebecca turned and walked out of the room, not in anger, but in shock. She didn't slam the door. She didn't scream. She just walked out. Because staying in that space any longer felt like trying to hold together something that had already fallen apart. That night, she sat alone, going over every word, every look, every moment that had led up to this. She felt lost, confused, abandoned. Not just by her mother, but by the version of her family she thought would always exist. The confrontation wasn't about one relationship or one decision. It was about the deep pain of watching someone you love drift into a world you no longer recognized. It was about a daughter fighting for the integrity of a legacy while her mother was trying to rewrite her future. And it was about the raw, honest truth that sometimes even the strongest families break. In the days that followed, Rebecca withdrew. She didn't show up for meetings. She didn't answer calls from the ministry team. She was hurt in a way that didn't have quick answers or clean resolutions. And Joni, from what Rebecca could tell, didn't reach out either. It was like they had both said everything they needed to say, and nothing either of them said had made a difference. But for all the pain, that confrontation mattered. It was a moment of truth, of clarity. And even though it left wounds behind, it also brought everything into the light. There was no more pretending, no more holding it in. It was the confrontation that changed everything, and no one in the Lamb family would ever forget it. The days after the confrontation felt like walking through fog. Rebecca Lamb couldn't sleep. She kept replaying every word that had been said, her voice shaking with emotion, her mother's tone cold and distant, and that final sentence that kept echoing in her head, "I don't need your approval." Something in her heart broke that night, and nothing felt the same afterward. Russell, she had grown up in a family known for unity, faith, and leadership. The Lamb name wasn't just personal, it was public. It was ministry. It was purpose. Daystar had always been their shared legacy, something Rebecca believed was built on values, on truth, and on honoring God. But now, everything felt unstable. The cracks that had been forming for months were no longer hidden. They were wide open for all to see, at least within the family. And while the outside world saw Joni preparing for her new chapter with Doug Weiss, smiling in interviews, traveling, speaking at events, inside the family, things were falling apart. There were no family dinners, no phone calls, no quiet apologies, just silence. Rebecca tried to stay strong. She kept telling herself she'd done the right thing, that someone had to speak up, that staying quiet would have meant betraying not only her father's legacy but her own sense of conviction. But the truth is, standing up had cost her. The fallout wasn't just emotional, it was isolating. The more time passed, the more she felt the walls close in. Her messages went unanswered. Her seat at Daystar meetings was quietly ignored. Her once central role in the ministry now felt like a fading memory. Rebecca, who had grown up on camera, who had once stood on that stage beside her parents and spoken with confidence, now felt like an outsider in her own family. Even her brother Jonathan, who had once been her closest ally, was quieter than usual. He had his own battles to fight within the ministry, and Rebecca didn't want to add to his burden. But his silence still hurt. Everyone seemed to be walking on eggshells, afraid to say the wrong thing, afraid to take sides. And in that silence, Rebecca began to feel truly alone. She stopped attending events, stopped checking in. Every time she opened her social media, it was filled with pictures of Joni and Doug, smiling in Israel, appearing on set, laughing with church leaders. It was like the entire ministry had already moved on. Like her voice had never mattered. And yet, deep down, Rebecca still cared. She cared about the people watching, the viewers who had trusted Daystar for decades. She cared about the message that was being sent, not just about relationships, but about leadership and spiritual accountability. And she still carried the weight of knowing that her father's dream, the legacy of integrity he had poured his life into, was now surrounded by so much division. But what haunted her most wasn't the public tension. It was the private loss. The feeling that her mother had chosen a new life and left everything behind, including her. They had once been close, sharing dreams, prayers, laughter, and long conversations about the future. But now they were strangers. And the silence between them was the loudest thing in Rebecca's world. She spent more time alone, pulling back from ministry and public life altogether. Friends reached out, but she often didn't have the words to explain what she was feeling. How do you tell someone that the place you once called home, the people you once trusted most, now feel unreachable? There were moments when Rebecca questioned everything. Had she made a mistake? Should she have stayed quiet? Should she have just accepted things the way they were and let it all go? But every time she asked herself those questions, she came back to one truth. Silence would have eaten her alive. She spoke up because she loved her family, because she believed in something bigger than appearances, and because she couldn't stand by while something sacred was slowly being rewritten. Still, the pain lingered. And the future? It felt like a blank page. For the first time in her life, Rebecca didn't know where she belonged. Not in the ministry, not in the family, and certainly not in the vision Joni was now building with Doug. Some days she wondered if there was still room for her voice, if the family would ever be whole again, if the ministry could find its way back to the values that once made it so powerful. And if her mother, the woman she had looked up to her whole life, would ever see her again not as a critic, but as a daughter who just wanted to protect what mattered. The path ahead was unclear. There were no guarantees, no roadmaps. Only questions. Would reconciliation ever be possible? Would the Lamb family ever rebuild? Or had the fallout become permanent? For now, all Rebecca could do was take one quiet step at a time, trusting that even in seasons of isolation, God was still working, still healing, still writing a story that wasn't finished yet.